happened right after he said he saw someone in the tree, snapped a picture, and now there's black fog in the picture.
Yeah, I'd be long gone in my car and saying, well, that's enough for me. I mean, I got to ask you.
I will admit, we did not go to Maple right away after that.
I got to ask you a question. When people walk through a cemetery trying to get, sounds recorded, how come nobody ever asks anybody, the residents there, does anybody want a cigarette, and see if anybody responds? I've asked a lot of ghost hunters that, because you know how many people have smoked, and they were addicted to it. I mean, that would be a question I would, if I was walking through, regardless where, if it was in a building or a cemetery, the first thing I'd say, does anybody want a cigarette, and see if anybody responds.
Yeah. Actually, none of us smoke, to my knowledge, so we wouldn't have cigarettes on us. But now that you mention that, I'm thinking about going to buy a pack and putting it in my box now.
I would. I'd get yourself a nice cigar, be walking around doing it, and then saying, hey, does anybody need a cigar or a cigarette or anything? And see if you get any weird sounds, Yeah. We have lit cigarettes in bars to try to get interactions with the smoke or get someone to say something about the cigarette. From the top of my head, really haven't gotten much out of it. But we also don't investigate bars very much. But yeah, I'm happy now to get a pack of cigarettes and stick it in my box and find out. I would. That's something I would try. But you know what? After my experience back, in the early 2000s, I leave it now to asking questions rather than going out and looking, because I don't want, ask a question and have somebody answer it that I can't see.
Yeah. Well, there was one cemetery we went to, really, really tragic. On our website and stuff, we call it Alt Road Cemetery because it's on Alt Road. Well, it was actually called Robinson Cemetery before the farmer decided to remove the stones and plow over it. So now, for a couple decades, these people basically fed his crops. Well, luckily now, the current owner of the farm recognizes that it was there, and he kind of farms around it. But there's nothing to say the cemetery was ever there. So we go and we, thinking these guys got to be pretty upset. They're buried here. They were farmed over. We just wanted to ask them some questions. And I don't remember when in the session, but at some point I asked a question, and the response on the EVP recorder was, "I'll effing kill you."
Wow.
So it's an EVP recorder, so we didn't hear it at the time. So I go home, and a lot of the times I review right away, or at least try to start reviewing right away. And I'm sitting there with my giant earphones trying to smash them inside of my ears, and I hear, "I'll effing kill you." Whew. Okay, I gotta take a break.
I would, I'd even start smoking at that point.
It was pretty scary. I'm a big guy. I was in the Army for almost 10 years. I deployed to Afghanistan. Not a whole lot scares me. But when something you can't see says, "I'll effing kill you," you start thinking, I don't know if I want to go back to that place yet. I think maybe we need to take a break.
Yeah, I would. It's also, I have had one of my guests, Liz. She writes, like monster books, series of them. And where she lives, I think it's Missouri, they had some battles from, the Civil War and all that stuff. And, you never know on your property. She owns, quite a few acres and stuff like that. But one day she was out there, I think, and now I could be totally wrong, but I think she was out there taking care of her horse or something out there. And she thought she saw a young boy walking towards her, from the distance, right, wearing like jeans and a hoodie. And all of a sudden, she took her eyes off of for a second, and then she went and looked, and he was gone, just totally gone.
Oh yeah.
And that kind of
that's happened to us so many times.
And then she has a newer house, so she's not worried about people dying in it before. That she took, possession of it. But she would tell me, like, the refrigerator would open and close while she's in the living room. You know, a refrigerator is not going to open and close. Or the bedroom door would open up and close, you know, and slam shut. And that's kind of eerie. Right. And then we were talking, and that's when she was telling me, well, there were some battles around there during the Civil War. You don't know. I mean, they could have been, bodies, planted on her property, you know, because when they died, they just buried them, you know, right where they basically fell.
Illinois is much the same way. We're right now researching a lot for the Black Hawk War. And a lot of people died in the Black Hawk War, you know. A lot of Native Americans, you had quite a few settlers, sometimes even women and children for the settlers. But history happened before the Black Hawk War. Native Americans were here for more than 1,000 years before the Black Hawk War. You know, the tribes were small back then, and land was obviously plentiful, but just the same thing. If you died, that's where you're buried. That's it. That's where you lay.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and the same with the Black Hawk War. When people died, they didn't have time to cart their bodies back to, you know, Fort Dixon or whatever. They just buried you. So one of the places we were looking into for the Black Hawk War, it's called, what was it? I think the Battle of Wadham's Grove. Very, very small battle. The only way to know where it's at now was the battle happened behind William Wadham's cabin. Well, William Wadham's, his cabin has an official historical designator. So when you go to the designator and you look behind his cabin, there's a guy's house there now. This whole battle happened right where this guy's house is.
I'm just wondering if the guy...
And it's like, yeah, do you go and knock on his door and do you be like, hey, has anything happened around here that's kind of weird? Do you tell him a battle happened right where your house is? Some people died. Some people might be buried in the ground here.
Yeah. That bone your dog just brought, you know, it looked like a human leg, thigh bone. It might be.
Yeah. And who knows? It could be, yeah. I mean, you have thousands of years of the human species being in the area, and, you know, only the last couple hundred is recorded by us. Who knows who's buried here? Who knows?
You know, and tell me if I'm wrong. It seems like when people die, like from a car accident or die from a gunshot or something happens where, you know, they didn't die naturally. It seems like that's also where it's more, I hate to say it, spirit activity. Am I right? Or am I wrong?
More active. So Dan and I actually wrote a book a couple years ago. Everything we've done is a couple years ago now that I think about it. It's called Paranormal Theories, A Logical Approach. And we try to look at things scientific. Like I said before, we go to these places, we try to collect data. We try to apply the scientific approach for a lot of our stuff. Obviously, with the paranormal, not everything can be scientific. So there is one theory in the book to where it's more spiritual. And the theory goes like this, just as you were saying. We think that the moment you die, where your spirit left your body, it almost creates like a spiritual anchor to where you're able to come back to that spot and haunt that spot. Yeah. And then the point where your body's buried in the ground, it creates another anchor. You can return to that spot. And you can move freely between the two spots because something tragic to you happened at either of those two. You lost your life, your spirit became separated from your body. And the other one is you're now buried in the ground. You know, spiritual rites were done and everything like that. So looking at it that way, it explains why buildings are haunted. Hospitals, asylums, car accident scenes. Because maybe the person that died, they have this spiritual anchor here now that says, nope, you're stuck here until you figure out what's going to happen to you.
Or they don't realize they're dead.
Right. Or, you know, they died and they're just kind of lost. So they're anchored to their body. You know, they don't want to be anchored to the hospital. They anchored to the cemetery now. You know, is it something we can back up scientifically? Not really. but it's a theory that makes a lot of sense to us.
Wow.
If you think about it, it does make sense.
Now, is that book still available that you guys wrote?
It is. You can find it on Amazon. It's Paranormal Theories, A Logical Approach. I want to say it's like $12 on Amazon. A lot of the times, if you meet us in person, we're selling them for like $6 or $7. We got to see if Amazon can reduce the price on those because it's set way too high. But we're currently in the process of taking some of the theories in that book and adding the new data that we've collected over the last 3 or 4 years, to where now the theory is expanded and makes more sense, or the theory shifted because the data says differently. Some of them were actually completely removed in the new book and replaced with different theories. That book, probably a few more years in the making until we get some more data. But yeah, our first one was that theory book. And there's a lot of good theories in it. One of our most popular theories actually was, from what I remember, I want to say he was a physicist. He sent Dan a message, and he said, this theory that you guys are talking about, it's, which one was it? How can the paranormal make us sick? It was basically, a retelling of the creepy church story. Well, why did Dan get sick before we were getting to the church? So we were looking at all the different ways that you would experience those symptoms: weakness, headache, dizziness, upset stomach. What can often attribute to that? Well, that kind of has some similar symptoms to minute radiation sickness. Okay, so what would potentially cause us to get minute radiation sickness? Well, let's see. Alpha and beta, that's not really going to do it. Gamma, not really. If you go beyond gamma into X-ray, well, X-ray can make you sick, so it's possible. But as you keep going above that, the higher up you go in the radiation chain, the more sick you get. So we started thinking, okay, well, let's just say X-ray. The paranormal realm, the spirit is able to influence your body using X-ray radiation. Well, why? Okay, so that means that the paranormal realm has to exist within some, I don't want to say multi-dimensional place, but let's just call it a multi-dimensional place where everything happens to be X-ray. Okay, so now we have to explain that. Well, radiation, for what we think of as radiation, being what comes out of your microwave, is the same thing as light. It's called light radiation. We exist within the visible spectrum. Everything to the left and the right of us, IR and UV, we really can't see that well. We can kind of see IR. You can't see the actual waves, but you can see the bulbs light up sometimes. And UV, a little bit, depending on the wavelength of it. So if we exist in the visible spectrum, the red through purple, and we know that if we use UV equipment, we can get a lot of great evidence. Wouldn't it make sense that the next step up after that being X-ray, we'd get better evidence? So that's kind of where we went with it.
Wow.
And we started using a Geiger counter that could actually track an X-ray. And some of the places we've gone to, now I'll admit, we probably haven't used it as much as we should, simply because between 3 people, you only have 6 hands. Some of the places we went to, you walk in and your baseline for X-ray is at 0.09. During an EVP session or a ghost box session or just a random conversation you're trying to have with a spirit, it goes up to 0.29. Now, everything under 0.3 is supposed to be normal, but the baseline reading was 0.09. So is this enough to call it evidence? Maybe? Hard to say. So it was a really long